Today we're going to have Brennan, one of our new guys. He has been with us about 6 months. He's going to go through some ES procedures and Java programs, kind of going through logic of how to route things through workflows, how to write metadata based on job tickets or file names, dynamically routing files through the workflow, different things like that, just kind of getting a deeper dive into a lot of the higher end functions of ES and routing files. You remember, depending on the size of your screen, you always have the ability on the top left of your GoToMeeting window to change the zoom percentage. You can zoom in or zoom out however you need to. If you have any questions, just type them into the GoToWebinar control panel under the questions area. Those will come through to us, and we'll kind of field those. If I feel that maybe something should be answered while Brendan's doing his presentation, I'll interrupt and interject that. If not, we're going to wait till the end and kind of go through the questions. So please use that. As a reminder, if you go to our events page on Blanchard Systems website, you'll see a schedule of our upcoming events, both for our semi-ad and virtual publisher products, as well as for the DALiM products, and coming soon, the line of woodwing products that we've just picked up recently. So with that, I won't take up any more of your time. I'm going to go ahead and pass presenter over to Brennan and let him take over.
Can you see
Brendan,
my screen?
yours? Yes, we can see it now.
Good afternoon.
Just to scare everybody.
Today's webinar will cover Java syntax inside of ES. When testing Java code, I prefer to use a Java compiler outside of ES, like this one, IDE1. It is hard to debug your code inside of ES. We can enter our test code here on this line. All the rest here is not that important, as it's just classes inside of Java. Placing anything here will allow us to test those kind of codes. One thing to note here is that the double slash tells the compiler that it is a, the double slash says that this is a comment and should not be interpreted. Running this code, since we have nothing here, we'll see that it's empty. Let's look at a more interesting example. In Java, there's different kind of variables. A Boolean variable that can be labeled as true or false. String variables, they contain characters. Char variables, they contain a single character. And integer variables, they contain integer. Running this code, we can see that when you're using this testing function, system out println. This is a good way to test functions. Inside of ES, this function is useless, as you can in some ways get it to print the error logs, but we're not going to discuss that now. As we see, when we print F, we get true. When we print G, we get hello. And when we print H, we get A. Print N, we get 100. Moving on to another function, if-then statements. Inside of Java, we can declare a Boolean function and run an if-then. If n, or if true, your statement is true, else your statement is false. Running the function, we see that your statement is true. If we change the in value to false and run it again, we can see now that your statement is false. So if true, go to this line, else go to this line. Moving on to another example, we have our equals function. Equals function basically says, does this string equal this string? And of course, it can be other variables, including Boolean, var, char. But we'll discuss this one. Since hello world is equal to hello world, when we run it, it should return a true value. If we change string in to hello world new, we will then see that it does not equal. And we get a false variable. Moving on to a more complicated equals example, using an if-then statement. If hello world is equal to string in, which it does, go to approval step. And if we wanted to bypass the approval step or route it down a different road, we can make it not equal. Again, I'm just commenting out the lines to switch the different variables just to show the demonstration. When it does not equal, it goes to the approval milestone. Any questions so far?
No, go ahead, Brendan.
Another thing is comparisons. Let's declare an integer as 3. System printout, we can compare n is greater than 4, which is false, n is less than or equal to 3, which is true, and n is equal to 3. When you're making a comparison, you want to use the double equals because an equal is actually assigning a variable to another one. We can see that false, true, true is exactly what we expected. If we change the integer n to 4, we can see n is not greater than 4, n is not less than or equal to 3, and n is not equal to 3. So all our values come false. Here's another example using comparison function. Integer is 5. If you have more than one if-then statements, you can use if-else. If n is greater than 4, print out n is greater than 4. Else if n is equal to 4, print out n equals 4. Else, which for all of the variables would mean that n is less than 4, n is less than 4. Setting n to 5, we can see that it follows this path. N is greater than 4. Setting n to 4, we can see that it follows this path. N equals 4. And last but not least, setting n to 3, we can see that it follows this path. Oop. Well, I made a mistake there somewhere. Oh, left a comment there. Sorry about that. And we correct. Moving on to another example. Parse int function. Parse int function takes a string value and parses it into an integer value. For example, string s is 9. If we wanted to compare that is greater than 3, we would not be able to compare a word to a number. When running the function, we can see that since 9 is greater than 3, it's true. And that if integer 2 would produce false. Now let's illustrate if you did not use the parse int function. You're sending a string and you're comparing it with an integer function. You can see that you get so many errors. The first type, string, cannot be compared with the second type, int. It doesn't understand the function. So always make sure to parse int a string before you compare it with with an integer. Looking at this example in more detail, let's say if n is greater than or equal to 5, you bypass the next step. Else, do not bypass the next step. Let's start with string is 4. Converted it to an integer and compared it. Since 4 is not greater than or equal to, we are not going to bypass the next step, which is what we expected. And if we change this to 5, we can see that we do bypass the step. Moving on. One of the big things about Java, copying and pasting. If you can see this function right here and we run it, this is a copy and paste function, you can see that it doesn't understand something's wrong, right. But the only thing different is the quotes. If you can see when I type in how the quotes change, which gets kind of ugly, and rerun the function, we can see that it behaves properly. When copying and pasting code, it's always good to retype the code or make sure that it is interpreted correctly in the program you are using. This is an example of a contains function.
Just to interrupt you real quick, Brennan, that's a really important one for a lot of you guys out there that are playing with this in ES, because a lot of us either copy from an email that one of our support guys might have sent or from the documentation, and that will happen often where the quotes or the marks are just, they're different characters when you're copying and pasting, and you'll get errors. And in ES, it doesn't really tell you very easily what that error is. Sometimes it can cost you a lot of time in troubleshooting. So as Brendan said, always, especially for the tick marks and quotes and anything like that, retype them. Always retype them after you've copied and pasted it from an example. Go ahead, Brendan. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Fred, for that. All right, so back to the contains function. Contains, in.contains, is taken, does this integer, or does this value, which is a string in this thing, contain AAA? So think of it as a search function. Since in does contain AAA, we expect the true result here. And that's what we get. But for example, if it was BBB, hello world, it will return false. Looking at the contains function in a more appropriate example, if it contains AAA, stop at approval AAA. Else, do not stop at approval AAA. Running the function, we can see that string in does contain AAA. So stop at approval step A. If it was BBB, we get do not stop at approval AAA. Moving on. Another interesting function is length. Length is used to count how many characters there are in a string. For example, n.length is going to return 1, 2, 3. So the answer would be 3. Up, and again, we get those copy errors. If we made it hello, that's actually 5 characters, so it should return 5, and that is what we expected. Looking at this in a more appropriate if-then statement, we can see that if m is greater than 3, bypass approval. Else, go to approval. Well, since n.length is going to be 3, it's going to fail, and it will go to the approval step. And that's what we get. If we change that over to 4, and again, copy and paste, we can see that it would go to the bypass approval step, and that is exactly what we get. Oh, okay. Here are some functions that pertain only to ES. When we get metadata, in ES we use the function get metadata to retrieve metadata and set metadata to store it. These calls require a category, a name, and a property. These cannot be tested outside of ES for this exact reason. Categories can be file bag, job, or page order. File bag is when you view it in the upload window. Job is on a project level, and page order is on a document level. We'll look more at this when we get inside of ES. For now, let's look at the name and property. For our intensive purposes inside of ES, if we navigate to Administration, Metadata Set, OWebinar, for our purposes, the name is always going to be OWebinar. Looking back, we can see that the name is this category. So in every instance, we will call a webinar, 0 webinar, I apologize, and that the properties will either be approval 1, metadata string, var file bag, var job, and page order. Of course, you can always define your own, but for this, again, for this example, it will always be 0 webinar. Back to categories. Here's a great example. If we upload a file here, we can see here that a file bag example, variable file bag new, is in the upload window. Any metadata in the upload window is going to be associated with file bag. Uploading the file, we can clearly see, once it finishes, that data was set. Var file bag is equal to file bag new. What we can also see is that a page order variable was set. Var page order 2014. That is going to be set usually in the document workflow. Looking at the document workflow, we can see that it indeed was set. Context.set metadata, page order is the category, that's the name, the property, and we set it with the year variable. We'll talk more about these variables shortly. Oh, can't get to the plus. Lastly, we have the job category. Job category is defined on a project workflow or project level. In this case, if we look over at the job ticket category job, this is an example of a job category variable. We have var job set as job new. If you look at the workflow of this item, click on the step after that, after we're set, wiffle log, show context, show the metadata. Here's another view of the metadata that is currently set. Looking at the job tab, we can indeed see that variable job, job new, was set. You can also re-look at your page order variables and a couple other ones. On a side note, variables here. These variables are very useful as you can call them during each step. Before I did reference the year variable. That was $ open year. All of these variables can be called custom. For example, current revision number. That would just be $ current revision number, and you have your variable. There are many uses for these. Let's go ahead and move on to some other examples, some real-world examples. This is an example using equals. I upload a file, and we have a file bag category of metadata, approval 1, and we have it set to true. Uploading it, letting the file run, we can indeed see that approval 1 was set to true. Looking at the workflow, let's see what's happening here. String approval was set using context.get metadata, file bag, because it was a file bag variable, category, name, property. Since this is true in our case, if true is equal to true, return true. Return true and ES will proceed to the next link. Returning false will cancel and not go down this path. So in our example, came in, true is equal to true, went to the approval step, and went to the next approval step. In this example, I don't have any approvers set up, just to illustrate the points. But of course, in real life, in most examples, you will have approvers. Let's look at the other example. If I delete this file, upload it again, and this time we have approval 1 is false, Again, we can see that approval 1 is false. Show workflow. Look at the link. We can see that it returned false. Since this is false, this failed, and it returned false. So it would not go down this link. Looking at the other link, we can see that it is set to if no other link matches. So it correctly followed this path and went to the approval milestone. Looking at a job example, we can upload another file. Well, before I do that, I'm sorry. I want to show you the job ticket, job example. We have 4 A's in here. This function is going to use length. I upload a file. Oh, sorry. Show workflow. Let's double check that the job ticket was set. And we can indeed see that it was set with 4 A's. Looking at the Java link, we can see that that string, job, a webinar, metadata string, was set to string n. Since it was 4, n.length returned 4, which means 4 is greater than 3, so it returned true instead of bypassing the step. I'm sorry, since 4 is greater than 3, it returned context by step, which means it bypassed the step. Otherwise, it would return true and went to this approver step. On the contrast, if we delete this, change this to only 4, now n.length is only going to be 3. Upload a file. We can see that it did not bypass the step. It went to this step. Again, that is because it did not match. Since 3 is not greater than 3, it returned true and went to that step. Now let's move on to the next example. Page order example using parse int. Upload a file. We can see that a page order category value was set metadata string 2014. If we look in the workflow, we can see that it was set using the year variable. Bear with me, this one is a little more complicated than the rest. Has a couple of extra functions. We're setting that to a string m, counting how many there are, making an integer, and then we're saying is 2014 greater than or equal to 2016? If so, return context by set step, else create, this is a brand new function, context set metadata index n plus 1. This allows us to set in a workflow a variable that can be called later in a following program link. We are setting index as 2014 plus 1, so index here essentially is 2015. Since it did not bypass the next step, it goes to this one. It actually went to this approval step.
Real quick on that, question on that one.
Yes, sir.
You said set metadata, this set variable you were talking about? Somebody asked about that. Yeah, I think you said set metadata, and they were asking if you meant the set variable, and I think that is it.
I'm sorry. I do apologize. Set variable. I've seen set metadata 1,000 times today.
So what you're saying is set variable actually sets a variable just for the process of the workflow, and it's not writing it necessarily into metadata in a job ticket or anything like that. Is that correct?
Correct. But you can still see this variable.
Okay, cool.
You can actually see this variable in show context, variables, workflow. That index was set to 2016. That just throughout the whole workflow. I'm sorry, I lost my place. Looking at the next step, we are get variable gets the index variable, which is currently 2015. If 2015 is greater than or equal to 2016, bypass step. Since it's not, we did not bypass this step. Else, save the new variable 2016 as index. Looking at the next one here, we again grab the variable. This time it is 2016. If 2016 is greater than or equal to 2016, return context bypass step and do not increment. We bypass the next step and it goes to approved. Again, since it ended up being 2016, if it didn't, since we didn't increment, index is 2016. Again, we can see that over here. Workflow. If you have any questions about this workflow, I can simplify things for you. I think that demonstrates it properly. And the last example I have is another file bag example. Upload a file. We'll leave the default using variable file bag new and just upload it and see what happens. It indeed was set to file bag new. If we go ahead and look into the function, into the workflow, I'm sorry, we can see that it was bypassed every step. Looking at our function, we set our file bag category, var web bag is equal to string in. This is a new addition. This negates anything that's currently in here. In contains AAA. If in does not contain AAA, bypass the step. Since we left our variable alone to file bag new, it does not contain AA and it bypassed the step. The same goes with this one. Contains BBB. If it does not contain BBB, return bypass step. And the third one is the same with CCC. If we go ahead, delete, and re-upload a file, this time changing it to AAA, CCC, it'll stop at the AAA step and the CCC step. Show workflow. We can indeed see that it did stop here, it bypassed this one, and stopped the CCC. Again, the function was take that data that we set, store it as a string. Does it not contain that? Bypass the step. Since it did contain it, it did not bypass the step. Here it does. Here it does not. Lastly, let's look at one other thing. We can do something crazy. Let's say that this variable had some other metadata in it. Let's say AA, BB, AB, CCC. Looking closely at this, it does not contain 3 A's or 3 B's, but only 3 C's. So we would expect this to only stop at the 3C approval step. Sending it in. We can indeed see that it bypassed the AA, triple B, and stopped at triple C. That wraps up what I had to cover. I finished a little quicker than I thought. Do we have any questions?
I think we can come up with a couple of them. But first of all, Brent, I think thanks to that. I think that was a very thorough explanation of a lot of the functions in that. I think hopefully, just to mention this to everybody that's on, this webinar was actually created specifically by a customer request. We do ask, if y'all have ideas for future webinars, information you would like covered, please send them to us at text@blanchard.com or through your normal means of communicating with us. we'd be happy to set one up specifically for you and invite everybody in. As always with most DALiM products, everybody can kind of benefit from questions that one person might have. So, again, hopefully this is what the person that requested it was looking for, and gives you a lot more information on how to really extend the use of your ES workflows and get the most benefit out of the product. Questions. I think one question I had was on the set variable function. Would the way to call that from within the workflow be context get variable as well, just kind of like get metadata, but except you just change out variable?
1 second. I think that was on page order here. This one is kind of confusing, but the next one, yes, context.get metadata will get the index, and context.get set variable, the actual variable and the value will pass between the two. But will pass the variable between each other.
Okay. Another question we had is if any of these procedures error inside of a workflow, so via typo or anything like that, is there a way to debug it inside of ES?
Inside of ES, no. The file will come through and just say aborted. For example, if I had something like this inside of the workflow, actually let me not edit there. I added a workflow here. We change a step. Come on. And let's say we got just the G wrong. Get metadata. We had a capital letter here. Delete the file.
You could just reprocessed.
Sometimes it does.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
It doesn't behave. Sometimes it doesn't behave. I like delete, make sure. Oh, and it worked. Well, I don't think it updated the workflow. No, it did not update.
No, because you did it. You did it just on the file, so I wasn't paying attention. When you did that, you added it just for that specific file, so it's going to use the.
You're right.
The workflow. Yeah, the workflow for
that
was created. But I think the simple answer, you don't need to show it, is that there's not that good of error reporting inside of ES itself for that. Typically, we'll get like the Catalina out, the Tomcat Catalina out file, and see errors reported there.
Right.
Mike, you'd agree with that?
Reported.
I'm not sure if you know about any other way to get better information. Yeah, so you showed it there with the abort. We also sometimes look at the JDF out on the files inside the workflow. But again, it's not very good troubleshooting on that. Typically, we just spend time looking and seeing what we did wrong by looking through the code or getting somebody to look at it. And I think we're running pretty long now anyway, so if you want to show that real quick. So that's kind of what the JDF results look like, nothing new.
I'm showing that it doesn't show anything about why it aborted inside.
Yeah, exactly. So, Catalina out is typically our main method of showing that kind of stuff, and it a lot of times will not show you anything as well. So you kind of have to really just be able to debug it, or have somebody look over and see if they find your typo, because sometimes you do get blind when you're writing this stuff, and you look over an obvious thing like the capital G versus the lowercase g, because this stuff is very case sensitive.
Correct.
All right. So I think on that note, I think any other questions we'll go ahead and answer via email. If you think of any questions, at any time, please go ahead and send them over to us. We'll be happy to answer them after. Have recorded this webinar, so you'll get an email tomorrow thanking you for attendance. You'll get a link to the video on that. Plus, we also have our YouTube channel, which we post all our videos from our webinars to the YouTube channel as well, if you want to peruse what's going on for the last few months and what we've done. We try to target the second Wednesday of every month for these. Next month, we'll probably be back to doing one on Twist. Either Mike or myself will do one of those, unless we get some really strong suggestions from somebody on different content. So with that, thanks everybody for your time today. Hope you benefited from that, and look forward to talking to you next time. Have a great day. Bye.